23. Eva had never seen a bathtub so big, wide and shiny, filled with so much crystal clear hot water. The tub's snow-white porcelain surface was cool to the touch, but standing alongside, she could feel the intense heat as the steam rose, covering the white tiles and silver fixtures in warm, moist vapor. Eva began to disrobe, slowly, drowsily, almost as if in a trance. She stepped gingerly into the tub, one leg at a time. Her upper body shivered, and instinctively she knelt closer to the water's surface. She touched the water with her fingertips, made a few slow, small circles, and cupping the hot water in her hand, let it run down her shoulders. Slowly, she crouched down and closed her eyes. The water rose and lapped at the rim of the tub. She could feel the water's gentle yet persistent buoyancy. Its heat penetrated her skin from chin down to toe. She seemed to float. Eva rested her head against the edge of the tub and lay there. How did she get here? The events of the afternoon were little more than a blur. She remembered reading from the Bible in the science hall chapel when a group of Japanese soldiers came in. She found reading the Bible to be quite difficult. Certainly the English was not something she was used to, having only started to learn to read it some 2 years ago. Admittedly, she was fascinated by the stories of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Noah and the Ark, the brothers Abel and Cain, and others, but once she started to learn about Jesus, she had to think about it harder. What did his words mean? Love your enemies so that you could be God's children? She had puzzled over it, and that was why she was nearly oblivious to the commotion in the chapel as the soldiers walked in. Now she remembered. When the soldiers had left and she rose to go to the restroom in the hallway, she noticed 2 of them still loitering outside the chapel. They seemed to be examining the flyers posted in the hallway. She saw a short, squat man gesturing her to come over, almost as if he wanted her to explain something to him that he had seen but didn't understand. Cautiously, she did so, but even when she stood more than an arm's length away, he reached out like a striking snake and caught her arm, wrapping his other arm around her waist with lightning quickness. She hadn't even had time to react as a thick, calloused hand was placed over her mouth. She flailed her arms and tried to kick, but the other soldier hurried over to subdue her. She was too small and too weak to fend off her attackers, a baby rabbit caught by 2 ravenous wolves. They were carrying her outside now, across the campus. She remembered someone screaming hysterically and other cries of alarm from those she passed, but no one intervened. How could they? Her near-witless body had been carried off so easily. Eva plunged her head into the steamy, warm water and began to scrub her hair, working her fingers deep into her scalp and the thin black strands curled around her hands. She wondered if she would just disappear, just like her parents. They had left when she was about 8 and never came home. That was just over 6 years ago. They owned a small goods store. Indeed, Eva's early childhood memories were filled with the sights and smells of small wooden containers displaying all kinds of dried and preserved dates, walnuts, chestnuts, acorn nuts, black mushrooms, and all manner of herbs. Once or twice a year, Papa would spend a few weeks traveling to Manchuria in the northeast tip of China. When he returned, he carried bags and bags of new goods to sell. People in Nanking loved such products for their nourishing properties and medicinal virtue. Her parents were not rich, but they worked hard to keep the store running, and worrying about their next meal was never a problem. It was in early September that Papa decided to take Mama with him on one of these regular trips north. Mama had never seen that part of China before. They had arranged for their neighbor to assist Granny and Eva in helping to take care of the store while they were away. She did go as far as the Lower Padstock train station together with Granny to see them off. It was the first time Mama was really going anywhere, and she was excited, giggling with girlish excitement at the prospect. As the train started to build up steam and puffed and chucked, Mama waved to her and Granny. Soon Papa's head appeared at the window too, grinning happily and waving. He seemed so happy. It was like he was waving to everyone on the platform. A minute later, the train pulled out of the station. Her eyes followed the train, and she could still see Mama's red and white patterned handkerchief fluttering, lingering briefly outside the window. Life in the store went on as before, with all the regular customers coming by and asking about Papa and Mama's trip. Even one full month had passed and Papa and Mama hadn't returned. Granny told Eva not to worry. China was a big country and it took time to get from one place to the other. When October had passed into November, she could see the anxious look on Granny's face. Waiting. November waned, and the first snow started to fall in mid-December. But still her parents had not come home. Granny turned and mumbled in her sleep, but Eva was weak. Every little sound she heard made her sit up in bed. So convinced was she that it was her parents coming through the front door. But at last she drifted off, only to wake up each morning to an empty house. Granny would be sitting by the door, crying, sighing, and crying some more in the days and months afterward. Eva was afraid that she would go blind from all her crying and sobbing. By now, even Eva had heard that the Japanese army had flooded into Mutan, a city in Manchuria. China had been invaded. Eventually, they closed the store and sold off everything in it in order to support themselves. Sometimes she wondered if it was punishment for her failure to bring in any little brother. After all, her Chinese name, Zhao Di, which she seldom now used, meant welcoming brothers. Perhaps her parents had been disappointed with their firstborn being a daughter. They must have wanted a son badly. One early summer afternoon 4 years ago, when she went to buy salt, soy sauce, and straw paper at a small store on Shanxi Road, she saw a girl, a bit younger than she, walking toward her. When they got close enough, the girl gave her a faint smile, and Eva smiled back awkwardly. The girl had two neat, radiant braids that almost touched her shoulders as she walked. She was wearing the same kind of school uniform that Eva used to wear, with a small school bag dangling at her hip. Why hadn't she seen the girl before? When Eva bumped into the girl again a few days later along the same street, when they smiled at each other again, they opened their mouths to say something almost simultaneously. Then they giggled. The girl said her name was Ning Ning and that she lived close by. Eva's home was close to Shanxi Road, which was connected to Ninghai Road and Songyeshen Boulevard North. Ning Ning lived in one of those small, winding alleys toward the other end of the same side street. They became very good friends, and Eva had gotten to know Ning Ning's family, her mother, father, and her grandpa. Whenever she visited, she was warmly welcomed. One early spring morning 2 years ago, 2 female students from Jingling College knocked on Eva's door. They were offering basic schooling to girls in poor families free of charge. Eva was 12 then. She desperately wanted to go to school. No, Grandma had mumbled stubbornly, rocking slowly in her squeaky chair. What good will come out of girls going to school? But the 2 young women talked Granny into changing her mind. The education would be free, they said. It was an all-girls school and in a building inside a walled compound of an all-women's college, so she would be safe. They convinced Granny that all girls needed to prepare themselves for the future. Granny mumbled something again and nodded. Eva didn't hate Granny. That was only what she had known all her life, that girls had no use for books and so on. In the years since her parents had disappeared, Eva now wondered whether Granny had come to blame her mother for whatever had happened to her father, Granny's son. Girls and women are not only useless, she could hear Granny's weary voice croaking. They can bring trouble too. One of the two Jingling students who had visited her that day was Miss Lin, but she liked to be called Helen. Eva thought she was beautiful, with a cheerful, sunny personality and joyous confidence. She had admired Helen from the first time she saw her. Helen even asked her mother to send some of her old clothes for Eva to wear. Most importantly, it was Helen who had helped Eva choose her English name. "Somehow you are Eva," Helen had said, "and Eva is you." From then on, she ceased to be known as Zhao Di. Eva loved the sound of her new name. She had become a new person, and for the first time in many years, she felt a sense of hope. There was a large framed mirror above the porcelain sink in the bathroom. The mirror was covered with steam. Eva reached for a white towel and began to dry herself. With her hand, she wiped the mirror clear. She had never seen herself naked like this before. She looked at her eyes. They were unusually large and deep, but behind them, even she could see there lay a pensive sadness that welled up from some place deep inside. Her nose was straight and delicate, her lips the color of fresh cherries, and her cheeks were soft and the color of pink-white rose. She had grown and matured in the years since her parents disappeared. Her skin was soft and smooth. Her breasts had grown into firm, delicate mounds with the rosy red buds at their center. She could see how small her waist was, as well as the pronounced curvature of her hips, which must have been what made people, men and adolescent boys especially, start to look at her more intently wherever she walked. She was no longer the little girl she used to be any longer. She remembered again the first time she saw a patch of red in her underwear. She was terrified and ran all the way to Jingling College. "It means you are a little woman now," Helen had said with a kind, mysterious smile on her face. Everything had been all right after that, and since that day, Eva had been watching her burgeoning womanhood with curiosity, pride, and a lingering sense of worry. Miss Hua, the tall, distinguished-looking American professor, had come to the Homecraft School a few times too. She had even taught a lesson there. She talked about why girls should be as valuable as boys in society, why girls should feel proud of themselves, and why girls were as much entitled to a decent education as anybody else. "It's because," Miss Hua said at the conclusion of her lesson, "God, our Father, loves you not a bit less than he does the boys." Eva didn't know if she had understood everything Miss Hua was saying about God, but she felt that she had understood. As she started to learn more, it awakened within her an intriguing sense of wonder. Once the bombing had started, Eva read and reread the Bible every day, even as refugees began to pour into the campus. She had waited for Granny to arrive, but when she learned that Granny had died in the bombing, she experienced a surprising, profound sense of peace. Eva had been shown a few pieces of clothing arranged in a neat pile on a chair next to the bathtub, and had been told to put on them after bathing. A small comb also lay on top of the pile. She picked up the first item of clothing and unfolded. It was a long cream-colored underrobe of some sort. It was made of a wondrously soft material she had never seen before. She put it on. It was cool against her skin and reached down to her knees. There was also a small white sash which she used to tie the robe around her waist. The next article of clothing was a large robe. It was thick but soft and light blue in color, with intricate designs of billowing clouds, cherry blossoms, and maple leaves. The sleeves were large, and when she put it on, it reached to her ankles. She tied the robe around her waist with another sash. On the bottom of the pile was a pair of sandals with thick red velvet straps. They felt cold and hard when she slid her feet in. She looked at herself in the mirror again. Suddenly she felt her heart beat faster. She reached for the comb and started to run it slowly through her short hair. Then she turned and with a few cautious steps slowly made her way out of the bathroom.